Welcome back to the All Things Special About Education podcast. I am Shannon, the Executive Director at Kentucky IEP Advocate here in Kentucky. And today I'm talking with Amber Devine Stinson, a speech therapist. We're going to talk about the boxes that you can put an X in on the consent to evaluate for all of the speech assessments. Amber is a speech therapist. Tell us a little about yourself.
Yes. I am from Kentucky. I have been a speech therapist for almost 20 years now. I know. I started out in this working in the public schools and did that for about 10 years. Did independent contracting for a year and a half or so, which is how we met, and then did private practice, which I loved. And I am now working in an outpatient clinic setting, working exclusively with autistic children, mostly who are nonverbal or non-speaking, and do a lot of augmentative and alternative communication with the patients that I serve.
Yeah, Christy and I were talking when I talked to her about how we met at a day program working with adults, which she pointed out that she took over for you. And so I met you at that same day program before we met, which is such a different world than we are in now.
I know, and I sucked you into private practice.
You sure did. And here we are. And then
I
sucked you into a board member. Thanks.
Here I am. Here we are, all together again.
Yes. Okay, so looking at the consent to evaluate, we talked in a previous episode about the importance of the consent to evaluate and that districts can only do assessments that parents consent to. So on the consent to evaluate, you will see an X if they're going to do an assessment. You'll see an E if they're going to do a review of existing data. Kind of a misnomer, gets confusing. You may think if you see an E, it means evaluation. That would make some sense, but it does not. It means review of existing data. So the bottom left corner on that table is the communication status section. So today I'd like to talk about what those skills are that are in that section so that as a parent, you can be well informed about the assessments that you're either asking for, so knowing what to ask for, and or also understanding what they're going to test. So when they are discussing these skills, you have an idea and you have a decent understanding of what kind of skills they're looking at, what you may see or not see that your kid is doing. So the first, I do not have it pulled up. Do you have it pulled up?
I do.
The first section is language. I do know that.
Yes. So the very first box is receptive language. So looking at receptive language, you are looking at how well your child understands what others are telling them or asking them to do. So following directions, understanding how to answer when they're asked a question, how to answer that question. It's just an overall understanding of how they are receiving language and understanding it and then able to follow through with what they have heard. Some of the assessments we do for looking at receptive language can look at even vocabulary. So if I say a word and I show you these 4 pictures, can you find the word that I am saying, right? So it could be a single word. It can be, do you understand categories? Can you find all of the animals, right? So that doesn't always, it does not necessarily require your child to say anything. Although if you're looking at how well they understand a question, if you're wanting them to answer like who questions or why questions, obviously that may require a verbal answer, but it is very much focused on what they are understanding, what they're hearing and how they're processing it.
So then also while, as I was like, let's keep this focused on speech, let's also just derail, a little itty bitty bit like we do.
Okay, a little bit.
The hearing assessment. So receptive language and hearing, because at some points it's important to think about is it that the child is not understanding the language that somebody is using and what you're expecting them to do, or is it that they cannot hear you? And so that's generally an assessment in a different part of the consent to evaluate, but those are screens and evaluations that can be done.
Yes. So when I was in the school, if I we'll go with brand. I'll just go with brand new kid comes in, needs an evaluation. One of the first things that we do is make sure they've either had a hearing screening or we do a hearing screening. And actually, no further assessment should move forward until the hearing screening is done and passed.
Got it.
Okay. So a lot of children coming into preschool, someone will come out and do like mass hearing screenings with all the preschoolers, right? So usually we would have, that would be somewhere like in a file that they have passed the hearing screening. If they had a hearing screening and they failed, the parent should have received notification that they failed the hearing screening and would require a full like audiological evaluation. And if they do fail the hearing screening, the speech therapist should not move forward with any further language assessments because you can't rule out the fact that it could indeed be a hearing impairment.
That makes sense. Something, I don't know if you know, or it's something that we can look at later. I know that that is incoming preschool for sure. And then also incoming kindergarten. That's part of the kindergarten readiness is a hearing and vision screen.
Yes.
Do you know if that happens again? Or are you referring back to that kindergarten screen if you're evaluating a second grader? Or do you do your own screen when you evaluate?
So, I haven't been in the schools for a while. So I'm just kind of trying to think back. I remember many schools had some schools had audiometers, right? So we as speech therapists come out of school, with our degree, being able to administer hearing screening. Okay, like that's part of our training. We do not do like a full audiological evaluation. So, and I can't speak to all school districts, of course, but there may be audiometers within the school or somewhere within the district, and there usually is an audiologist as well in some schools, where if you can't find any record of a hearing screening, that it should be able to be done there at school, within a week or so, of being able to get a hold of it. I would say, like, I know for my own child, right, they do hearing screenings even at the pediatrician. And they check that box as part of like your immunizations and your school physical and that kind of thing. I would say that if I saw that they had passed the hearing screening coming into preschool and they passed the hearing screening again coming into kindergarten, I wouldn't suspect that we would then need to redo the screening unless there's been some kind of major change. Not that you never see that hearing impairments are something that happen for other reasons, but unless you had some kind of reason to believe that, like, I'm talking and they're saying, huh, like they're actually not hearing you correctly. But so I'm not sure now if they would go back and redo that screening. And then of course you do have some of your students who cannot participate in those screenings. Whether it's because of physical disability, if they can't follow directions for other reasons, because you do have to be able to follow the direction to raise your hand when you hear the beep, right? So for some of those children, we can also ask, did they pass their newborn hearing screening, right? Because every child gets a newborn hearing screening. And then for some of our students, children who have different disabilities and different medical diagnoses, they will have additional sedated ABRs, auditory brain response, right? So they are sedated, and they watch how the brain responds to different sounds. So, I mean, all of that should be taken into consideration.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And also taken into consideration while, just to bring it back to the speech assessment, that
here we go.
That's the important piece is,
yes.
Are you able to hear what I'm asking you to do? And
right.
also do you understand? Yeah, because
right.
that understanding piece is what you're looking at for that receptive language.
Yes. Yes. Next. Yes.
Next.
Okay. All right. The next section, the next box is expressive language. So expressive language is looking at a variety. Well, number one, how does the child use words to express themselves in all areas? Are they using words? Are they using 2- and 3-word sentences? When they're stringing words together, are they putting the words in the right order? Can they label things, right? So when your child says, airplane, that's expressive, language. You saying, what is that? And them answering, airplane would be the receptive piece, right? So how are they expressing themselves? So, these assessments can look at very simple, vocabulary kind of assessments of you show a picture and they label it, what one word means all of these are kind of going back to the categories, but now they're having to label it. Oh, those are all animals. These are all instruments. These are all containers, right? For our kids that may not understand the question and you say what one word names all of these, they actually will name, this is a lion and an elephant, and because they don't understand the category. So your expressive language, how can they, some of our verbal older students, maybe, can they retell a story? Can they recall details in a story that has been read to them? Can they listen to 2 paragraphs and then answer questions about what they've just heard, right? And can they sequence that and tell you, the events that happened in order? Can they tell you what happened yesterday? Can they tell you what they did over the weekend, right? So some of the kids that I work with, have trouble recalling and then verbalizing what they just did the day before. And so, but expressive language also looks at just any way that they express themselves, do they use gestures appropriately? I'm here, can they have a back and forth conversation, with peers? Any further things on that?
No, I think that's good. I think it's just
okay.
Knowing that the language component is, as you're thinking about skill deficits and strengths, does your child understand what you're asking them to do? Are they following directions? Are they able to respond to you? And when you can be assured that their hearing is okay and that they are hearing what you're asking, when you're talking about language, you're talking about how the understanding of words and how you're using the words.
Yes. And you brought up hearing. I don't know if you've already touched on this in any other podcasts, but making sure that English is the first language, if that's what you're testing them in.
Yep. Great point. We've talked about native language.
Okay. So yeah. So also as a speech therapist, if I were in a school and I'm sitting in the IEP meeting and we have interpreters, right, for the parents, obviously a big question is when talking to parents about some of these things, as a speech therapist, I would want to know if the parent says, he follows directions, but he's really not using many words. My question would be are you seeing this only in the first language?
Right.
Are you seeing this only in English, but when he's being spoken to in Spanish or French or whatever, he does well? Because then a language difference is not a language disorder, right? So just wanted to kind of stick that in there, that also we need to make sure that we are considering factors that if another language is spoken in the home.
Right. So, that's a question too on most
yes.
of the eligibility forms as well.
Yes. Okay, so our next box is speech sound production. This is probably one of the, I think probably the easiest to explain. So these are our students, children who have trouble pronouncing very specific sounds, right? A lot of times maybe we know what they're talking about because we have context and we can understand because we have just, watched the new Inside Out movie. We're talking all about it. We know what they're saying, but they come home and try to tell you something that happened at school and you don't have context and you cannot understand what they're saying. Not that these things cannot also happen in conjunction with language disorders, but there are kids who understand direction just fine. And if they could pronounce all of the sounds they're trying to make correctly, they have really great expressive language.
Right.
So sometimes, these are kids that are have trouble pronouncing the TH sound, right? So instead of bathtub, you get bathtub, right? Your kids that have trouble with their R's, that's a big one. Just going to put this plug out there, parents, if they're just 4 or 5, it's still okay. R's and L's are some of the last ones. So, they're going to see the wabbit outside and they love you very, very much, right? But when you get into the 6-year-old, and it's still there, you definitely want to start kind of remediating that. Our children who have, you can have a lot of speech sound errors, and it could be that they're missing whole processes, right? So they're your kids that maybe are leaving off the ending sound of every word, right? So cat is just ka, and book is just buh, right? But you're really looking at, it's very much about how they are pronouncing their speech sounds, or if they're leaving certain sounds off, or unable to make certain sounds.
And a word that you might hear, speech sound production, but also articulation is another word.
Articulation, yes.
Yep, might hear when they're discussing those evaluations.
Yes, because I would probably say, oh, they have an articulation disorder, right? And that means that they have speech sound production and use, right? So a lot of times you'll also hear that because sometimes they can pronounce a sound by itself, but when you put it into words, then it's just a jumbled mess, right? So speech sound production and then use of those speech sounds within the word, or articulation. Your articulators have to work together.
Right. Yes.
Our next box is voice. So this is voice and I will say we probably don't see voice disorders a lot in the school system, as much as you would maybe an outpatient clinic, because there's been something has caused the voice disorder. But voice would cover, does the voice sound smooth, right? Our children should not have very breathy voices. They should not sound very hoarse. We're also looking at volume, right? Are they very loud? Is their pitch and their tone seem appropriate for their age? So I mean that's pretty much voice. And again, we don't see that as much. I would say in the school setting, as you would as like in an outpatient clinic where there's been something that has caused problems with the voice. Right. But things can happen, there are, vocal nodules or, different things that can, cause, voice problems. But of course that could, if there is a problem with the voice, if they're not loud enough, they can't be heard,
Yeah, I was just going to touch on the educationally relevant portion of that, because there are times, sure, vocal quality may not be what you expect it to be, but can you still answer questions if you're called on? Are you still able to project enough so people can hear you in the classroom?
Right.
But when you're looking at those kinds of qualities, like how does your vocal quality impact
your ability, yes.
participation in classroom activities.
And specifically, I think when you said that, what came to my mind would be any kind of like neuromuscular kind of condition that may affect, the diaphragm and the ability to really project your voice. So you may just have a weaker vocal quality. Sometimes cerebral palsy, right? The vocalizations can seem very strained and choppy because there's a, you have to coordinate your breath and your vocal folds, and everything working together can be very hard if there is a physical component that has been, causing that. But so that is voice.
And that is different than a child who speaks really softly because they're shy. So you can be shy and speak softly, and that's your right to be shy and speak softly. It's not a body thing that is making that happen.
Right. And I would say, well, like, how are they at home? Right?
Good question.
Are they yelling at their little brother every time he takes their toys? And if so, it's probably not a disorder. Right.
You're probably shy in front of 30 kids. That's okay.
It is okay. Yes. The next one is fluency. And so just to, fluency is stuttering, right? So, I mean, that you will, that's a lot of times fluency, I feel like it's a term that isn't just kind of obvious, but so when you're looking at fluency disorders or stuttering, right? If your child is repeating sounds at the beginning, so like ball, okay? I'm going to try to do this in a way because I know some people will only be listening and not watching. It can also look like they are holding the air behind the beginning sound, right? And it almost looks like they're straining to get their lips to come apart. So it's like people, right? So, and a lot of times it's on those words that like your P sound, right? You have to have pressure behind there, right? It can also sound like and then right, so you have these fillers while they're trying to get their words out. It can have secondary behaviors like eye blinking, head nodding, shoulder shrugging, things that almost look like it's just like they are just struggling to get the words out.
Like they're talking with their whole body and
their whole
yes.
So, and there's a lot of things that can go into fluency and stuttering, but that is what you would be looking for. If you feel like your child is repeating parts of words, whole words, syllables in words, they are actually getting stuck and they can't even start the word. Also prolongation. So I went to the school bus and then went to the pool, right? Okay, that is what that would be a reason for a fluency assessment.
Got it.
Yes. Also note that disfluent, there are normal phases of disfluency in child language development.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but I think that when our students who have fluency disorders or stuttering, it's usually pretty obvious when it is a disorder. Are any questions on that one, Shannon?
No, I think that's good. Yeah.
Okay. The next box is oral mechanism. Okay. So when we do an oral mech exam, and actually hearing is on there. When we do it is. It's actually after this one. So an oral mech exam looks at how well can the child move their lips and their tongue and their jaw, which are all needed in order to speak. So we may have them like open their mouth. We want to look inside. Do they have a particularly like high arch? If a child sounds very nasal, right, that can be an indication that air's leaking. Do they have some kind of some mucus cleft, which is, like where the roof of the mouth isn't completely closed the way it should be, right? So we're looking at the arch. We're looking at how their dentition, how their teeth are. And then a lot of times we ask them to imitate oral motor movement. So can they stick out their tongue? Can they put their tongue to each side of their mouth? Can they puff their cheeks and hold air? Right? Because that is needed for speech. Can they smile? Can they pucker their lips? And so we'll have them do these things. And that can just kind of let us know, like, is everything in their mouth actually moving correctly to allow them to produce those speech sounds? So
yeah. Going back to the articulation again, is yes. Your mouth made in a way that you can articulate these sounds?
Yes. And I'm just going to keep going. So we don't, yep. I don't want to deep dive into other things. So oral mech exam, very much just looking at, is the child able to move their lips, their tongue, their jaw, and all the parts of their mouth that are needed to produce the speech sounds. And if not, then other things should happen. Okay, the next one is hearing. Again, as speech therapists, we can do hearing screening, right? That hearing screening looks at, been a minute, four different frequencies. And it is just a quick screening. Like, can they hear something, at 500 decibels, at 1,000 decibels, at 2,000 decibels? You're kind of just hitting the main ones that are really important for hearing most of the speech sounds and producing most of the speech sounds. If they pass that hearing screening, usually nothing else is done. If for any reason the child was to fail the hearing screening, we would then want them to have an audiological evaluation where they're in the sound booth and they put the headphones on and they're, listening to all the sounds. Because, right, hearing is important for understanding speech, for producing speech sounds, for hearing directions, and then for also answering questions correctly to make sure if you actually heard the question correctly. Yes, so we all, so hearing is very important. The next one is behavior observation. And I mean, it is a behavior observation, I guess, right?
Yeah.
So as a speech therapist, I may want to go into, if I'm evaluating a child, it's one thing for them to sit in a very quiet room with just me and point to pictures and answer questions, and then I send them on their way, and I'm like, then they do okay. It's very different if you watch them in a classroom that's full of 20 other kids, and the hustle and bustle of the room, and then the teacher is trying to read a story, and somebody else is raising their hand to ask to use the restroom, and so seeing how they are using their communication in the classroom. Because we know that standardized assessment alone does not qualify you or disqualify you, right. For those services. Because what you can do sitting in a room with just a psychologist or just the OT or just a speech therapist is very different from how you're able to process language, how you're able to follow directions and focus, and how you're actually communicating with your peers and your teacher. So, looking at, but also, for me as an SLP now working with a lot of non-speaking individuals, for those kids, if they're not using speech to communicate, how are they communicating? Yes. Right?
We're going to get to that.
I know we're going to get to that, but yeah. So, are they going up to, are they watching their peers? Are they pulling a peer by the hand and trying to get them to come over? Are they pulling another adult to what they want? Are they taking an object that they're struggling with and giving it to someone to ask for help? Right. So, are they pointing? Are they gesturing? Are they covering their ears because it's too loud? So, So behavior observation.
Well, no, a phrase you might hear in that too is functional communication and functional language. So like, how are you using these skills that we already examined in these standardized tests? How are you able to make those things useful in the classroom, which also gets you to that educational impact, so that you're able to use those skills that have already been assessed in the standardized assessments, and how well are you using them? How well are people understanding you? Because you could, for sure, have some statistically significant scores, but then upon observation in a classroom, depending on what your situation is, maybe those things are not really impacting your access to education. I would argue that's probably pretty rare, because communication is important in all aspects of education, but it's at least something
I think it's probably
the
other way. I think it's probably the other way around sometimes. Like, in a one-on-one setting, they actually do pretty good following a direction, but you get them in a classroom and there is breakdown. They are struggling, Can I ask, how are we on time before we get into the next section?
Yeah, we should wrap this up, because the next section will be a big section. So we will get to that.
Okay, yes, our last one is augmentative communication. How about I just glaze right over it really quickly?
Perfect.
Okay, really quickly, just so we know that we have gone through these sections. So augmentative communication is any other way a child uses or communicates other than verbal speech. So pointing to pictures, typing, sign language, writing, gesturing, anything that they use to augment or help their communication that they are not able to do using typical means, I guess, as we might say.
High-tech speech generating devices with robust vocabulary.
And that is
not limited to
for another podcast.
It is, and we will get there.
This is my jam. So augmentative and nonverbal communication is where it's at for me, for a lot of our kids. So, but that is what it is, right? So if your child is not using words to communicate, verbal words to communicate, and they are using other ways, they are pulling you, they're bringing you their empty cup, they are using augmentative communication. And how to, and that assessment should be looking at what do we need to get in their hands to give them a robust language system to improve their communication.
Because access to communication is important.
Yes, communication is a basic human right. It is a basic human right.
Also going to get to that. Man, we got a lot of teasers here.
We do. Stay tuned.
Yes, stay tuned. Okay, so that wraps up the communication status section of the consent to evaluate. That gets us as far as we're going to get today.
For today.
And we will be back to discuss the augmentative and alternative communication and the Communication Bill of Rights.
We will.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Where can
Thank you so much for having me on.
Welcome. Where can everybody find you? If they have any AAC questions, where can they find you?
They can email me. They can email me at Amber, AMBR.CCC-SLP@gmail.com.
Perfect. We will list that in, wherever we list things. We'll list it there.
Because to make sure that people can click a link and email me. I would be more than happy to talk with people.
She will. I do it all the time.
All the time.
All right. Thank you, Amber.
Thank you.